After months of silence, Maxwell Chikumbutso just reappeared calm, focused, and carrying a message that could flip the energy conversation on its head. If you followed his journey, the self-powered systems, the car that doesn't plug in, the drones, then you already know why people across the continent and beyond are buzzing. But this time, the story isn't just about one inventor. It's about a country stepping into the ring, a continent refusing to sit out, and a technology that, if it scales, could redraw the map of who owns energy freedom. Stay with me, because near the end of this video, I'll roll a short clip that reignited the internet back in early February 2025 and had everyone asking the same question. Where did he go and what happens next? Let's set the scene. Maxwell supporters never really went quiet. They were in the comments, they were on forums, they were at community meets asking why the updates slowed down and whether the projects were still alive. Then bam, he's back, and he isn't just tinkering in a garage. He's aligning with a national vision. And that's where the plot thickens. Because the elephant in the room here isn't a prototype, or a test car, or a demonstration unit. It's a country, Zimbabwe. And the real story today is how politics, minerals, and momentum could bankroll a moonshot if the people behind it keep their nerve. Here is the bold move. Maxwell's work is now moving under a protective umbrella at home. He's been wary of taking big checks from outside claims of tech being shelled, patents being boxed, or equity being traded away for pennies. So instead, there's a wager happening. Build locally, control the process, and position Zimbabwe as a launch pad for disruptive energy tech. The ambition? Vehicles that don't rely on traditional charging. Power systems that don't need fuel or sunlight. Infrastructure that shrugs at blackouts. If even a fraction of that holds steady, we're not just talking about a few factories. We're talking about a new playbook. Now, to really understand why this matters, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger arc. Zimbabwe's recent history is a story with sharp edges. In the early 2000s, the country made a decision to redistribute land to address colonial-era dispossession. Inside the country, many saw it as long overdue. Outside the country, the backlash was swift. Sanctions, isolation, credit lines cut. A country pulled to the margins of the global financial system. You've seen the headlines. You heard the arguments. But ask yourself, was it only about land? Or was it also about leverage? Because here's the kicker. Zimbabwe isn't just farmland. It sits on serious mineral wealth. Think gold. Think platinum. Think lithium. Think diamonds. Think chrome. The kind of minerals that sit at the heart of the 21st century economy: batteries, chips, vehicles, aerospace, green grids. And that's just the front row. The broader mining sector covers dozens of minerals, with some of the largest known deposits of platinum group metals and high-grade chrome anywhere. For years, reports have suggested the sector anchors a massive share of exports and a meaningful chunk of GDP. A few years back, targets floated around the idea of pushing annual mining earnings into the tens of billions. If power constraints eased, if policy steadied, if currency issues got better, if capital flowed. That's a lot of ifs, but it explains a few things, doesn't it? So when you hear that a controversial sanctions regime hit the country's access to capital markets, halted loans, and made international transactions a nightmare, it's not just a diplomatic footnote. It sits on top of an economy loaded with rare resources, precisely the kind of resources that can bankroll ambitious tech if they remanaged well. This is where the narrative flips for Maxwell supporters. They're not just celebrating a genius in a lab coat. They're asking whether a mineral-rich nation, locked out of a lot of traditional finance, can fund a homegrown technology revolution that spits out jobs, builds factories, and reduces dependency on imported fuel and imported parts. Is that idealistic? Absolutely. Is it impossible? Not if execution shows up. Let me bring you into a recent exchange that got a lot of people talking. After a long wait for updates, the team behind Maxwell's projects sent word about what's been going on. Paraphrasing here, they decided to shift from relying on overseas suppliers to building their own manufacturing base at home. That means land. That means construction. That means sourcing materials locally. It also means projecting longer timelines, recalibrating costs, and owning the entire production pipeline from parts to assembly to quality control. They made it clear, this isn't a quick fix. Factory building takes time. Sometimes cement isn't available. Sometimes core components get scarce. Sometimes a single missing cable halts an entire build line. So if you're sitting there thinking a demo today equals a delivery tomorrow, take a breath. They're saying they want to do it properly and do it locally, even if that stretches the calendar. Now, let's go back to those sanctions for a second, because the effects were not just political. On the ground, it meant international banks stepping away. It meant exorbitant fees for routine payments. It meant over-compliance companies refusing to touch anything to do with Zimbabwe just to avoid risk. Many well-known payment platforms shut their doors to residents. You saw what happened next. Inflation spiraled in the worst years. Jobs evaporated. Importing medicine could take ages. Fuel shortages hit. Skilled professionals left for greener pastures because they needed stability for their families. And there were global reports acknowledging that restrictive measures, whatever their stated targets, spillover effects on ordinary people. If that sounds bleak, you're not wrong. But even in the middle of the storm, the country didn't sit still. It turned to new partners and old friends. Infrastructure finance came in, often backed by resources. Telecom systems expanded. New roads and public buildings were financed. Some of those deals came with strings long-term access to minerals, trade preferences, geopolitical alignment. Meanwhile, other alliances hovered. Defense cooperation here, agricultural assistance there, humanitarian projects in the mix, food security initiatives. You get the idea. Every lifeline came with a ledger. And every ledger asked, how much control are you trading for breathing room? Now, we have to keep it real. It's not only external pressure that got Zimbabwe where it is. Internal governance has had its own mess. Analysts and watchdogs have flagged corruption, illicit financial flows, deals that don't pass the smell test, gold smuggling that drains the treasury, ghost workers lurking on payrolls, public funds that go missing. That stuff kills trust, and without trust, even the best ideas bleed out in the execution phase. People notice when elites feast while the power flickers and the hospital runs out of basic supplies. And the truth is, to make any tech revolution stick, the basics have to be fixed procurement, transparency, rule of law, predictable policy. Otherwise, it's like trying to run a marathon with your shoelaces tied together. But here's where the conversation gets interesting again. The rest of the continent has watched Zimbabwe's journey closely. Regional bodies have condemned the impact of sanctions. Neighboring countries have absorbed millions of migrants and called for a reset. Global powers have squared off at the United Nations over what to do next, some pushing for more pressure, others warning that sovereignty matters and interference backfires. Meanwhile, parts of Europe have relaxed certain measures while keeping others, trying to split the difference between leverage and engagement. And in all of this noise, ordinary people just want three things: jobs that pay, a currency that holds, and power that stays on. Enter Maxwell's vision, round 2. This is bigger than a neat gadget. It's also bigger than hype. The core idea is simple to describe and tough to deliver: energy independence at the device level. A generator that works without fuel or sunlight, based on a system that captures and manages ambient energy, if validated at scale, changes the rules in communities without reliable grids. A vehicle that keeps moving without plugging in for hours, if it can be mass-produced safely, and affordably redefines mobility in places where charging infrastructure is scarce and fuel is expensive. Imagine field clinics that run their equipment in rural areas without diesel. Imagine schools that never cancel because the lights are out. Imagine small businesses that don't spend half their profits on generators, cables, and constant maintenance. That's the promise. And yes, skeptics will demand peer-reviewed proof, certification, and independent testing. That's fair, At scale, those things won't be optional. They'll be mandatory. The fact that the team is shifting toward local manufacturing suggests they know the scrutiny is coming, and they want to control every nut and bolt along the way. Let's talk about the big question. Where does the money come from? How do you fund factories, certify new products, pay brilliant engineers, and build a whole supply chain from scratch? This is where a country's natural wealth becomes critical. When you have reserves of platinum, lithium, chrome, gold, and diamonds, you have assets. In theory, a nation can use these resources to back its own industrialization. It's about negotiating smarter deals, stopping the financial leaks, and making sure more of the value stays right here at home. Imagine this: new e-mobility components, innovative battery alternatives, next-gen power electronics. All of it being researched, manufactured, and improved right here in country. It's possible, but it requires the right policies and the money to be aligned. It's a huge undertaking, no doubt. But if you're going to pick a project to rally everyone around, a headline-grabbing energy technology is a fantastic choice. It signals ambition. It creates high-quality jobs in engineering, manufacturing, chemistry, and software. Most importantly, it sends a powerful message to young people. Your brain, your talent, is a vital asset here, and it tells the rest of the world, we don't need your validation to start building our own future. Are you still with me? Good, because Zimbabwe is standing at a crossroads with two clear paths ahead. Path 1, focus on cleaning up governance, stabilizing the economy, and re-engaging with the global financial system, but this time on much better terms. Path 2, bet big on alternatives. This means strengthening regional partnerships, fostering South-South cooperation, and pushing for sovereign industrialization. Letting homegrown technologies, like the one Maxwell is building, lead the charge, regardless of what outsiders think. But here's the secret. These two paths aren't mutually exclusive. The smartest strategy is to do both at the same time. You can demand clean, transparent procurement while also giving the green light to new factories. You can work to stabilize the currency while also rolling out a new generation of energy tech that cuts import bills and boosts productivity across the board. Now, about that video clip I mentioned earlier. In early February 2025, a short video went viral. It showed Maxwell in a controlled environment, explaining the progress of his new energy system. He hinted at next steps that suggested serious government-level backing. The symbolism was powerful. The unspoken message was, the waiting is over. Speculation exploded. Was there a pilot program in the works? Had the technology passed internal tests? Was a full-scale production line just around the corner? And then ... radio silence. Theories started swirling. Some said it was a strategic move to lock down intellectual property. Others whispered about external pressure. And some figured it was just the boring but real logistics. Permits, land acquisition, financing. Today's update clarifies things. The pivot to building everything locally explains the quiet period. The paperwork, securing the property, pouring the concrete, sourcing the parts, hiring the people, that's months of grueling work. You can't rush it without risking the entire project. Anyone who's ever built anything more complex than a simple demo unit knows this pain. The internet demands results tomorrow, but manufacturing just laughs and says, see you next quarter. Let's talk about perception for a moment, because the tone of the conversation really matters. When big, ambitious ideas come from Africa, there is often an automatic assumption from the outside world that it's all just smoke and mirrors. Yet at the same time, the continent keeps achieving the improbable. Think about the mobile money revolution, life-saving drone deliveries of medical supplies, or massive renewable energy projects. Does every single moonshot land perfectly? Of course not. But that's true everywhere in the world. The difference is, when an ambitious attempt happens in Harare, Lagos, or Nairobi, people often treat it like a myth or a fairy tale. When the same thing happens in Silicon Valley, investors throw money at it. That double standard is an old story. You don't have to believe every claim you hear, but you have to recognize that the most effective solutions to local, Problems often come from the very people who live with those problems every day. And if a country that has been told no for 2 decades finally decides to say yes to itself, who are we to sneer at that audacity? Okay, let's quickly touch on the geopolitics. Sanctions didn't just disappear after the change in leadership years ago. They evolved, they were refocused, repackaged, and rejustified. Certain individuals and companies remain blacklisted under various international frameworks. The official line is that these are targeted and don't hurt ordinary people. But in reality, banks and international companies often overcomply to avoid any potential headaches. And that caution inevitably bleeds into the wider economy, affecting everyone. On the other side, regional bodies have been calling for a complete rethink, arguing that these restrictions are hurting development and stability across the entire region. And yes, there's a very healthy and necessary debate happening within Zimbabwe and across Africa about governance, rights, and reform. But at the end of the day, most ordinary people aren't asking for a perfect government. They're asking for a functional life. This brings us right back to energy. If homes, clinics, and businesses can have reliable power, it's not just about convenience. It's about dignity. It's about freedom. It's the ability to plan your week without having to pray that the lights stay on. So where does Maxwell's technology fit into this picture? It sits right at the intersection of national pride and sheer practicality. The pride of building something transformative at home and the practical benefit of cutting energy costs and creating resilience. If the models can scale, if the certification process is successful, and if they can lock in safety, reliability, and affordability, then the path forward is clear. They can launch pilot programs in country, expand regionally, and eventually find global customers in places that are wrestling with the exact same problems: volatile power, expensive fuel, and fragile grids. And that pathway doesn't require permission from the old gatekeepers who never had the region's best interests at heart anyway. What it needs is investors with patience, engineers with grit, and leaders who don't panic when the timelines inevitably shift. And trust me, timelines will shift. Building a factory doesn't care about trending hashtags. It cares about supply chains, weather delays, customs clearances, legal contracts, and safety inspections. It cares about whether a critical piece of machinery arrives intact or gets stuck in transit for weeks. It's about hiring skilled people and being able to pay them on time every time. So here is a promise I can make. You're really likely to experience more periods of silence before you see a finished product. That's just the nature of deep, complex manufacturing. But silence does not mean nothing is happening. In fact, it often means the exact opposite. It means the real hard work is underway. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive. If you found this insightful, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. See you next time. Let's keep our eyes on the prize. Imagine a modest starting point, a small run of energy units shipped to clinics and schools for pilot verification. Data is collected. Problems are logged. Engineers iterate. Version 1.1 shows up, then 1.2, then 2.0. A second facility opens for a specific subcomponent. A university partnership forms for testing and certification. An export permit gets approved for a regional trial. A financing instrument may be tied to mineral revenues. Maybe the local bonds feeds the expansion without ceding control. That's how small becomes big without losing its soul. Not overnight, but over quarters and years. And that, friends, is how you turn a headline into a national asset. If you're feeling the energy right now, type "build it" in the comments so I know you're dialed in. Because this next bit matters. There's a reason so many people wrap their hopes around Maxwell's work. It represents a break with patterns that kept power and profits far away. The old pattern says, extract here, refine there, ship value elsewhere. The new pattern says, design here, build here, employ here. That's not anti-anyone. That's pro-home, and it's contagious. When one sector flips, others follow agriculture, transport, housing, water. Before long, you're not asking permission to develop. You're exporting development. Of course, execution remains everything. The team's update signals a harder route owning manufacturing instead of outsourcing. That raises the bar. It means they'll be judged not only on innovation, but on systems, procurement, compliance, worker safety, environmental standards, customer support. That pressure is good. Pressure refines. And the audience, meaning you, has a role here. Ask smart questions. Demand evidence, but also understand the rhythm of real progress. The internet moves at a sprint. Heavy industry moves at a march. If you try to sprint a march, you end up face first in the mud. All right, before we land the plane, let's circle back to the man at the center. Maxwell's return doesn't mean everything is solved. It means the conversation is back in motion. It means a fresh round of updates, a clearer picture of the plan, and a renewed commitment to do this in a way that builds local strength. He's not treating this like a solo act. He's talking teams, partnerships, protection of intellectual property, and a pipeline that doesn't crumble if one link gets hit. That's growth. That's maturity. That's exactly what you need when your dream collides with real-world constraints. Now, as promised, let's roll that clip in your mind's eye, the one that spiked the timelines months ago. You see Maxwell standing beside a unit, pointing out improvements, speaking confidently about the shift to domestic production and the need for patience because big projects demand big discipline. You hear a line about backing from the highest levels and a roadmap that prioritizes pilots over hype. Then the screen fades and the comments explode. People want dates. They want specs. They want to know the price. They want to know when they can place an order. And for once, the responsible answer might be the most exciting one. Soon enough to be real, slow enough to last. Here's where I land. Something about this moment feels different. Maybe it's the new alignment with a national strategy. Maybe it's the decision to build the bones of a manufacturing base at home. Maybe it's the humility of saying, we chose the harder road, but it's ours. Whatever it is, I'm here for it. Not because hype is fun, but because I've just seen what energy does when it stops being a luxury and starts being a given. It stabilizes families. It grows small businesses. It keeps kids in school. It saves lives in clinics. It lets people dream with the lights on. Let me know how you're feeling about all this. Do you think homegrown manufacturing is the right call, even if it delays product releases? Where do you stand on the balance between secrecy to protect IP and transparency to build trust? And if you had the chance to choose the first rollout location for a pilot, where would you pick and why? I read your comments, I take your feedback, and I bring your questions into every new breakdown. If this resonated, hit like so the algorithm knows this conversation matters. Subscribe if you want to track each step of this journey, from dirt on the factory floor to the first units in the field. Share this with someone who needs a blast of hope mixed with realism. And to everyone who stuck through the twists and turns today, stay curious, stay patient, and stay ready. The quiet months are when the foundation gets poured. When the doors finally open, you'll be glad you waited.